2, 3, 4, 5. Sanvanadi Dumela, good evening and welcome to episode 181 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. We started slightly later than normal. I feel as though we're having back to school technicalities. If anything, it should have happened yesterday. When you go back to work after the December break, you tend to forget your password. Well, we're doing it on the second day. So that's certainly something that caught us slightly off guard. But thank you very much for joining us. Of course, if you're tuning in from YouTube, from Facebook, from Instagram, or even from Twitter, welcome to the Private Property Podcast. We come to your screens every single weekday at 7 o'clock, gremlins allowing. And of course, I never come alone because there are always other shows that you can look forward to right here on the Private Property social media platforms. I'm talking about the First Time Home Buyers Show that comes to your screen every Wednesday rather. Look at me talking about every second Wednesday. You can see this episode is going to be that back to school first day back, except it's happening on the second day. Well, we have, of course, the First Time Home Buyers Show that comes to your screens every Wednesday at 7:45 for SC Classen. So you can look forward to the first edition of the First Time Home Buyers Show for 2021 tomorrow evening. And we've got the Farming Podcast. Now, it used to be during the day, but it's now at 8 p.m. every Tuesdays and Thursdays. So you can look forward to Umbalino go right after this show, of course, at 8 o'clock. That's going to be a great conversation. Of course, if you have an interest in agriculture, or perhaps you want to, explore different things that have to do with agriculture, or make sure that you go do work that has to do with maybe satisfying your green fingers. I always say that I love the idea of farming, and there's so many different things that you can do when it comes to farming. I mean, the value chain is so vast. Well, that's a show that you do not want to miss out. Catch Mbali just after the show at 8 o'clock on the new time slot for the Farming Podcast. And over the weekend, Chad brings you the Home Buyers Show at every Saturday and Sunday at 1 o'clock. And that's certainly the Home Shoppers Show, rather. That's certainly a show that you do not want to miss out. Well, we are trying new things. It's a new year. And one of the things, of course, is that we also want to, bring some new things. You can see already even the way that we're delivering the show is slightly different from what we're used to. One of the things, though, that we're not doing differently, that we know you absolutely love at home, is, of course, our regular competitions. We love running competitions because we also know that you love giveaways. And the one that we're running to kickstart the year is, of course, the Sherlock Holmes competition. I love Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I've watched the series so many different times. And this time around, we want you to play detective and want to make sure that you have as much fun, not just across our social media pages, but also on our website. And how it works is every single Monday, we're going to be sharing a riddle that's going to go across our social media pages, and you have to solve the riddle. So you can also go on the website, then go and look for where the riddle essentially points you to. And as you search on the Private Property website, all the people who get the answer right and are able to identify where the riddle points you to will be entered into a draw to walk away with 5,000 rands. And of course, we're also going to be making sure that you also stand a chance of winning the grand prize that we will be also having. We will be announcing the winners every Friday right here live on the Private Property Podcast. So that's a competition for you to look forward to at home. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fun, not just on our social media pages, but also, of course, on our website. Talking about social media, if you want to follow me and always keep up with what's coming up in the show and other property matters, then do make sure you follow me on Twitter as well as Instagram on @Zamantungwa_K. Well, to get started with our conversation this evening, it's one of those very contentious and very picky issues because we deal with it very often. And I always say that we're always going to deal with it because increasingly so many of us are living in community schemes. And there's so many different things that we don't quite understand about community scheme living. I mean, I've always shared about how I'm low-key heartful of it. and actually just want to move out and not live in a community scheme. But also, of course, I love the convenience of it all and not having to attend to certain things because I know that it's taken care of. Well, something that we're going to be touching on this evening is understanding the exclusive use areas in sectional title scheme. So if you don't even know what the exclusive use area is, you certainly want to make sure that you stay tuned. If you want to find out what you can and cannot do when it comes to the exclusive use areas and how you can perhaps go about changing the rules when it comes to it, because I know some of you sometimes tend to ask us about that quite a bit, then do make sure that you stay tuned. Also share, of course, your views around, or certainly your experience around sectional use areas in your own complexes or estates that you live in. I'm sure a lot of us have a lot of those issues where we live, when we live in sectional title communities. And the person who's going to best help us understand, the exclusive use areas is Auren. You see, now I'm stumbling over his name, and I was so proud of myself earlier for not stumbling over his name. It's Auren Freitas Santos, who is the founder and director at the advisory. Auren, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zama. Thank you for having me this evening.
It's only a pleasure, Auren. I don't know, I was doing so well when we were off air. Now we're on air. I feel as I'm just going to accept that this episode, there's just many gremlins, from starting late to, stumbling over your name. But Auren, of course, we're talking about, the exclusive use areas and getting a better understanding. I think before we even look at the nitty-gritties, what exactly is an exclusive use area in a sectional title scheme?
So exclusive use area is one of those weird concepts that I've always found weird in the context of a community scheme, because the very nature of a community scheme, right, is community spirit. Things are shared, people live close in close quarters, it's densely populated, and now to try and add in a concept of exclusive use into that mix seems like quite a weird dichotomy of concept. So I think that's why it's quite a misunderstood concept. As one of the concepts I find most misunderstood in community schemes. There's a wide variety of them, and you've alluded to your heartfulness about community schemes, but one of the concepts that are misunderstood is exclusive use areas. So to answer your question, an exclusive use area, in effect, is a piece of common property which has been demarcated for a specific owner in the body corporate to use for their exclusive use at the exclusion of everyone else in the scheme. Now, typically, an exclusive use area is a garden, for instance, that's attached to your section, or a storeroom. Also, most commonly, is a parking bay or a garage. And then there are other ARB examples like an attic, or even the external walls of a commercial building where signage needs to be installed. So that type of thing. So it's a very creative concept that bodies corporate use to allocate various rights of exclusive use to owners.
And I mean, Auren, when we look at community scheme living, we know that there can be so many contentious things. You've got strangers living in one yard. I mean, I always share with my viewers how when I first moved in here, the idea of, I park my car, and as I'm walking to my apartment, I'm bumping into strangers, but where you're in my yard, but it's also your yard. So, I mean, there are just so many things that can happen, especially when you're not quite used to it. What are some of the perhaps common issues that you tend to find occurs when it comes to common use areas?
Now, that's a very widespread issue is in community schemes, is where some people in a scheme would assume that they have a right to exclusively use a portion of common property, and the most typical example is parking.
Yep.
Now, parking gives me days of fun when dealing with clients on the disputes around parking, and parking typically is allocated as exclusive use areas. Now, that's where the most confusion arises, when you purchase into a body corporate believing that you have a dedicated parking bay, and 2 weeks down the line you get home and someone's parked on your parking spot, and you're all up in arms, and you go to the trustees complaining that someone's in your parking bay, only for them to advise you that, sorry, you actually don't have an exclusive use right to this parking bay, and your estate agent who sold you the place was clearly mistaken when they pointed out your parking bay. And either your parking bay is all the way on the other side of the complex, or it's a free-for-all where it's a first-come, first-served sort of scenario. So that's one of the most common examples. Other examples, which are a bit closer to home, would be owners that believe that they have exclusive use rights over their garden areas or their backyards. Only to, I've had quite a few interesting consultations with clients about neighbors who just enter into their backyard and start fiddling in their garden and putting on, popping up a pop-up chair on their lawn to suntan or what have you. And for them to then realize, I don't have exclusive use rights to this garden, so it's in fact common property, and that owner is free to sit there and sunbathe in his Speedo, and I can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think, it's one of those things that does catch people off guard quite a lot, because I remember when I bought this specific property, one of the things was the attorneys, making sure that they stipulate that the parking is in fact for exclusive use, and I remember wondering, okay, why must they almost like double check that is the case, and I think it was only months later that you realize that actually there can be parking wars in a lot of complexes, especially where there essentially isn't enough parking spaces for people who live there. Oftentimes there are 2-bed, 3-bed apartments, but each apartment is allocated one parking bay. So it certainly does create quite a lot of chaos. I think often when we speak about the issues of sectional title, community schemes, and some of the issues that people sometimes find, a lot of my guests always point to how the 3 big issues that will always come up when you're dealing with sectional title communities is people, pets, and parking. And those are like the 3 pressure points almost consistently, whether it's people not knowing that they can or cannot have pets, or of course, as you were saying earlier, just fighting over parking. So now, Auren, how do people then go about rectifying this? You find yourself buying into a sectional title community, and you perhaps didn't ask for the rules, or you weren't aware that your parking bay, for example, is not for exclusive use. What are some of the steps that people can take to try to remedy this? Because as you can imagine, especially for people who've bought, you've now thought, I'm probably going to be here for a couple of years, even if it's not obviously for the full 20-year term, but you're certainly going to be living there, perhaps let's say for 5, 7, up to 10 years. And that's not an issue. You don't want to be parking in different places all the time, right? That's like going to the mall. It's such a headache. So what are some of the steps we can actively take in order to resolve it?
So as with most things in life, prevention is obviously is always the best route to take, and you would want to identify any exclusive use rights before even signing your offer to purchase. And in order to do that, let's unpack what the two types of exclusive use rights that the sectional title legislation acknowledges or caters for. The first type is what we call a registered exclusive use right, or a real right. And this is a right that is registered in the deeds office. You receive a title deed to that area. So as part of your transfer, you're actually going to be signing documents for that. It's a very identifiable right. You can bond it if you need to. You can take financing out on it. So those are what we call first prize exclusive use rights. There's never any doubt about them, no confusion surrounding them, and they're quite easy to identify. The second type of exclusive use right is the one that causes most of the issues, and that's what we call rule-based exclusive use rights, or personal, what's a mere personal right. And that is an exclusive use area that has been established in terms of the body corporate's rules, so either the management or the conduct rules. And the difficulty that comes in with this is, in the past, before the Community Schemes Ombud Service came to the fore and was established in 2016, bodies corporates, whenever they changed their rules or updated their rules, they filed that with the deeds office. Now, that filing process didn't go through any vetting by the deeds office, didn't go through any approval process. So it was a simple fact of getting a rubber stamp on your rules and filing that. And there were instances where rules weren't filed or the plans weren't included in the rules that were filed because no one was checking them. And then now you sit with a situation that there's such confusion around where, in fact, these exclusive use areas are, who have they been allocated to. So very, very, very important when you purchase into a scheme, ask the estate agent to call up the most recent management and conduct rules of this body corporate so that you can have a look at it. And then if you see that this set of rules does not have a layout plan in which the exclusive use area has been identified and the location of it is identified and allocated to a unit, then I would say approach with caution, because clearly there's some confusion around these and it's just going to lead to dispute. So that's the prevention that you need to look out for before even stepping on that landmine. Now, if you've missed the boat and you were excited to sign your offer to purchase and now you're in your body corporate as a member and an owner of your section, and there's confusion around the exclusive use areas, the only real way to remedy that would be to either create registered exclusive use areas and have that your sectional plans updated and filed in the deeds office and have each owner issued with a title deed to the exclusive use area. That's the one option, but that requires a unanimous resolution. So it is impossible almost to obtain that.
I was about to say that's borderline impossible.
Yes. To try and get everyone, unless everyone is benefited by the decision, but that's almost never the case, because that's why there would be a dispute, because two people are fighting over one parking bay. The other option would be to create exclusive use rights in terms of your rules. So either in your management rules or your conduct rules. Now, depending on which set of rules you go for, you have various levels of approval requirements. So management rules, again, unanimous resolution. Conduct rules, a bit easier, special resolution to have those exclusive use rights established. So that's how you go about remedying that if there isn't exclusive use rights.
We are, of course, taking your questions and comments at home. We're talking about understanding exclusive use areas in sectional title schemes. It is one of those issues that if you don't know about it and you end up living in a community scheme, may potentially become an issue. So you certainly want to make sure that you clued up on it as much as possible, especially if you want to be buying into sectional title communities, because you tend to find that so many issues tend to come up once you've bought. You find out rules that you were not aware of. Perhaps you didn't ask the estate agent before buying. So these are some of the issues that we tackle. And I think when it comes to exclusive use areas, they do tend to be very contentious. Some people want to, set up and we'll deal with this a little bit. Or I think one of the things that we sometimes find, it isn't so much an exclusive use area, but you'll find that in community schemes where, for example, there is a let's say a courtyard, or they've got the clubhouse, then one of the trustees almost sees some kind of business opportunity and wants a little bit of a little section of the of the clubhouse, and they want to be able to use it exclusively, which of course is impossible to really pass. And I think sometimes they want to use their weight as a trustee to say, look, they can't do this, even though they actually can't. And so those are some of the issues that we sometimes tend to find. So if you've had any issues with your sectional title community, especially when it comes to exclusive use, do share that with us down here below. We are taking your questions and comments. So we've got questions on Facebook. They're coming from Fahan Sidiku, who asks, he's asking questions regarding trustees. He's asking, is it only owners that can be trustees? And he continues to say, can a non-owner be a trustee? Maybe your daughter owns the house now and the mom wants to be a trustee. What are the laws according to CSOS?
Okay, Okay, so to answer that question, the easy answer is you do not need to be an owner in order to be a trustee in your body corporate. The prescribed management rules specifically allow non-owners to be trustees as long as they are correctly nominated and elected at an AGM. They're more than welcome to serve as a trustee.
You know, I'm certainly interested to know, Auren, when we look at the trustee composition, suppose you have, 3 trustees, would it be possible that 2 of them are actually non-owners and only one is an owner? Because I can almost foresee, a low-key coup, or, certain trustees or certain owners nominating 2 trustees who are not owners in that, sectional title community in order to push their own agenda. And we see this all the time. I mean, there's always trustee agendas every time there's sort of a new trustee that comes on. You find some who never leave their post. They've been chairperson for many years, and everybody knows that whether they are leading with an iron fist or making sure that their friends or family members get all the contracting work in the complex. So how does that composition essentially work?
Yeah, so I think just before even getting to that, I think it is quite a frustrating thing for most people in community schemes, where it's akin to what I find quite frustrating about American politics and how the administration changes every 4 years, and they change so drastically. So you would have the Republican Party in for 4 years, you have certain policies, and they work towards achieving those policies, and then a new Democratic Party comes in and they change everything and executive orders left, right, and center to change everything. So they never really get anywhere. And I think that in the context of a community scheme applies quite well as well, where every single year, every trustee automatically needs to resign, right? So they resign from their post, but they are eligible for re-election. Now, there's in certain schemes just this power shift every single year, and the body corporate doesn't get anywhere. They don't achieve any of their long-term goals and what have you, and it's quite frustrating. So that's just a general observation that I find quite common in community schemes. But with regards to your question on the ratio between owner trustees and non-owner trustees, there is no specific or prescribed ratio. So it doesn't say that the majority have to be owner trustees. If the body corporate owners believe that it would be in the best interests of the body corporate to, in fact, have a majority owner or even owners or occupiers who reside permanently in the scheme to be on the board of trustees, they can simply update their management rules to make provision for that ratio. And sometimes it is good to have that in place, because then you have people that are invested in the body corporate, that live there every day, they're hands-on, as opposed to someone sitting in New Zealand who doesn't even read their emails about their body corporate.
It certainly does make quite a big difference when you have owners who live in the community scheme versus those who are potentially only renting. You certainly, I think you take more ownership as a trustee when you live in that particular complex, because you're dealing with the issues, you're seeing them every day. It's your home, so you want those matters to be attended to as efficiently as possible. We've got another question here coming from Facebook. This one is coming from Utepo Mukhubudi. I actually love this question. He says, let's say my kitchen sink mixer is installed onto the wall, and I want to change the plumbing pipes for the mixer to be on top of the countertop. What are the ways of going about this, since you are only liable for interior renovations?
Okay, so she seems to be referring to, is that the question there? Okay, so she's wanting to rearrange the plumbing within her kitchen.
Yeah.
And how to go about that. So the general rule of thumb in a body corporate specifically is, if the changes that you plan on making have no impact on the external appearance of your section, or any impact on the common utility pipes and all that type of thing through the building, then you can go ahead and do that, as long as it's obviously within reasonable hours, that you're not working after hours at 11 o'clock at night and causing an unreasonable disturbance. But as long as you're not affecting the external appearance or the change or look and feel of the building, there should be no issues there whatsoever.
Auren, how would you then go about, dealing, and this is something that I've actually encountered before, where when you look at, the piping that goes through, I'll essentially say the developer did incorrect piping, to be quite frank. So when you look at the piping, it's one of those complexes that have, 3 floors. So the geysers are at the top, and the water runs through. So the hot water runs through inside somebody's unit, servicing the 2 units below. And typically we know that those would, be outside, but in this instance, they're actually running inside. The moment there's now an issue with that particular pipe, we know that everything that's inside your walls you deal with. If there's, any flooding inside your walls, you deal with. But now these pipes, they are servicing other units below you, but they're the ones that essentially have an issue. How would one go about remedying that? Because you wouldn't necessarily go cut off people's water supply because you're just like, listen, I'm hurtful. This is not my problem. You'd want to obviously find a way that works for all parties. And one of the things that's probably clear is you don't want these pipes here because of whatever, reason. So what are some of the active steps that, people like that can take? Because I've seen it in some of the, developments that have been built, not so much very new, and it's also not the very old ones. But unfortunately, we have seen certain developers, cut corners when they've been building, and that becomes a very big pressure point, because any plumber who comes in will be like, well, that wasn't supposed to be like that. And yet here you are, you've got a big complex that's running, and that's something that some of the owners have to deal with.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, and it's in fact quite an interesting innovation that the sectional title legislation as a brand new concept introduced at the time of the promulgation of the Sectional Titles Act. And specifically Section 27 of the Sectional Titles Act creates what we call an implied servitude over in favor of an owner of a section whenever he has to receive water. This is a good example that you've raised. So if I need water from a pipe that runs through 3 other sections and over a piece of common property, then into my section, I have an implied servitude over those sections in question, as well as the common property, to have that pipe run over that section. And that implied servitude entitles me the right, which has to be exercised by the body corporate, and I'll explain what that means in practice in a moment. But it offers me the right to have access to those sections on reasonable notice, to enter into the section and have that pipe repaired if it's preventing me from receiving water. So if you, in your example, you're on the bottom floor and the guy above you, there's an issue with the hot water pipe that's running to your section, but through his section, if there's an issue, you need to notify your trustees, because the trustees have to exercise that right on your behalf. So what the trustees will then do, they approach the owner, give him a notice to say, listen, we're giving you reasonable notice, whether that be 24 hours or whatever it is, you need to grant us access so that we can remedy the pipes in your section. And because that pipe feeds more than one section, the fact that it's within a person's section is irrelevant. So it doesn't absolve the body corporate's responsibility from repairing that. So it in fact is a body corporate obligation because of the fact that it feeds more than one person. So now it essentially becomes common property. So the body corporate needs to enter into the section, fix the pipe or the leak or whatever it is, and do that on behalf of the owner at the bottom. That's what that implies. And that implied servitude is such a misunderstood concept as well. And it's actually not a well-known concept by a lot of owners in sectional title schemes. But if you took the time to read your title deed that you receive from the deeds office when you purchase, if you read through the finer print, you'll see it mentions your implied servitude, and when applying that in practice, it becomes quite interesting to just know what your rights are.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Auren, I can already imagine perhaps, let's say, the owner at the top not wanting to give access to, the plumber to fix it or to deal with the issue, because they would perhaps they would say, listen, this is my place. I don't want anybody coming into my place. So then, in instances where the plumbers are not given access in order to be able to address the issue, how do we go about solving that? Because I can already just think conflict. Somebody's thinking, this is my house. You now suddenly want to, if it's a pipe, it's running through walls. So you essentially want to break down a wall. You want to do all kinds of things. And it's and you're probably not affected at that time because you're fine. You've got your water, you're sorted. But there's somebody else who at that moment would be struggling. So how would we then best remedy that?
So that's where this concept of an implied servitude becomes very important, because it establishes your legal basis upon which to take legal action against this owner who is preventing access into their section. So in the absence of an implied servitude, what rights do you have to enter this person's home? You don't have any rights whatsoever. But now that you have a statutory created right in terms of Section 27, you can then approach either the courts or possibly CSOS for an order requiring that person, in terms of Section 27 of the Sectional Titles Act, to give you access, and that person needs to comply with that order. But you would usually find in practice, once it's explained to that person that there is in fact a servitude, that he has a legal obligation, 9 times out of 10 they open the door for you, because it comes at no cost to them, right? Because it's a body corporate obligation. So really, it's a bit of inconvenience for them to open it. But that's why the Act requires that inspection to take place within reasonable hours as well. So but would it be reasonable to ask the person to open the house at 11 o'clock in the morning when most people are at work? Maybe not. So after hours is probably more reasonable. So it's just finding that reasonable balance. But people need to understand, and this is a concept that's also misunderstood, or not misunderstood, I think it's just blatantly ignored by people who purchase into a community scheme, is that you are committing yourself to communal living. So you have to give and take. You have to live and let live, and allow people the opportunity to enter your space. And you're not living on a farm somewhere secluded and in isolation. You're sharing your space with a lot of people, and sometimes it's uncomfortable and sometimes it can be messy.
Yeah, and that's why it's so easy for a lot of us to get hurtful and probably want to try a different way of living, because you just can't get used to community scheme living. Auren, before I let you go, any final tip you'd like to share with our viewers at home when it comes to exclusive use areas that they always need to bear in mind, especially those who are going to be buying this year? We've got a lot of viewers who have ambitions of buying, whether it's their first property this year or adding new properties on their property portfolio.
So I think we went on a bit of a lateral movement on the trustee discussion and the implied servitude, so we didn't get to quite a few important points that I think is worth discussing around the exclusive use areas. And I think just to summarize that in a nutshell, I'm going to just touch on the most common mistakes that people make when dealing with exclusive use areas. And hopefully we've got 2 minutes to do that. So the most common mistake is owners not being aware of exclusive use rights, whether they have them or not, or don't have them. So that's always point number 1. Figure out whether you have your rights and whether they are registered or rule-based, so that you have that peace of mind. Because you would tend to assume that when you walk into your lovely new home and you have this fenced-off garden in the backyard, you would assume that that's yours. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's yours. It could be common property, and you need to allow people in there. So get that sorted. The second common mistake is the failure on the part of the body corporate to recover what we call exclusive use right levies. So because you've been given an exclusive use right over a piece of common property, the nature of the maintenance obligations in respect of that area changes. So the body corporate remains responsible for maintaining and repairing and keeping in a good state of repair, but the obligation to cover those costs have now been shifted to the holder of the exclusive use rights. And what bodies corporate fail to do is to recover exclusive use right levies from their owners. So very important for the trustees to listen closely on this point is, if you know that there are exclusive use right areas in your scheme, are you collecting exclusive use levies? And those exclusive use levies cannot just be a thumb suck, like I see in practice quite often, where people say, okay, you need to pay 350 Rand for a parking bay. It doesn't work that way. What you need to do is every single year, you have to prepare a accurate, as accurate as possible, summary of all costs necessary to defray the costs of repairs, maintenance, insurance, all that type of fun stuff relating to exclusive use areas. And once you've established that amount, recover that from your respective owners on a monthly basis. And then the last, and I'm sure we've run out of time, so the last common mistake is in schemes where the trustees believe that there are exclusive use rights, they tend to assume that the body corporate has no obligation to maintain that area. So they leave it to the owner or the holder of that right to maintain and repair and paint and keep it nice and pretty. But the fact remains is it's common property. So the body corporate has the responsibility to maintain and repair that area. So if you have an exclusive use right garage, and your roof starts crumbling or there's issues with the roof, the body corporate can't wash its hands on the fact that it's an exclusive use area. The body corporate has to step in and repair that. Yes, they can recover the costs from you, but they need to actually make sure that they have routine maintenance to ensure that your roof doesn't collapse in on you. So that's 3 common mistakes I think every scheme and owner should be aware of. This is quite a dense legal concept, so it would have been nice if we had more time, but I think we've covered the basics for owners to understand.
And one of the great things, Auren, because we come live every day, is that we'll certainly be inviting you back on to get a better understanding. I think, if anything, this is a foundation to exclusive use areas. We love talking about community scheme living because increasingly so many of us are living in community schemes, especially, of course, if we're living in the major metropolitan areas. So having a good understanding of living in a community scheme, what you can and cannot do, mistakes to avoid, what you should ask up front before you buy into a community scheme. These are issues that we certainly love exploring here on the Private Property Podcast. We'll certainly be inviting you back in the future so we can look into some of those issues. Auren, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Zama, and there's never a dull moment with community schemes, so I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you so much, and that is Auren Freitas de Santos, who is the founder and director at the Advisory. And that brings to the end to this evening's show. I did say earlier on that this show is filled with many gremlins. I'm very glad that we're able to get to the end. We didn't have any load shedding, although at some point my light bulb looked as though it wanted to turn off. It certainly has been a pleasure to be with you this evening. Do continue sharing your experience of sectional title living, and also some of the issues that you want us to tackle when it comes to living in a community scheme, because there's so many and they're so varied, and the reality is they have legal implications. It's not just a thumbs up or a thing that you do because you feel a certain way. There's a legal framework that governs the way that we live in community schemes and what you can and cannot do. So if there's still certain issues that you're a bit uncertain about, then do drop us a line down here below, and we'll make sure that we either bring Auren back or, of course, other experts to help us better understand that issue. Well, that's it from me, Zamantungwa Kumalo. It has been a pleasure to be with you this evening. Remember to enter our Sherlock Holmes competition. We have shared the clue on our social media pages. We want to make sure that you also go onto our website in order to look for where the clue leads you. And I'm going to leave you the very capable hands of Umbalino, who's coming up at 8 o'clock with the Farming Podcast. Until then, hopefully you're staying home and staying safe.